I decided my son's grief was disruptive, so I sent him to boarding school to protect my stepdaughter's comfort. Now he won't come home for Christmas and says I no longer exist to him. I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore. My first wife died 2 years ago, suddenly, at home. My son was there when it happened. He was 12 at the time. I won't get into details, but yes, it was traumatic. After the funeral, I went back to work within the week because sitting at home was making things worse, not better. I put my son into therapy immediately. I handled what needed to be handled. The problem is that everything stopped after that. The house froze. Every day revolved around his moods. If he was quiet, we had to tiptoe. If he was sad, plans got canceled. If he had a bad day, everyone else was expected to absorb it. I tried to be patient, but patience without limits just turns into paralysis. I remarried last year. My wife moved in a few months after the wedding with her daughter, who is 13. She has anxiety and has been in therapy for years. She does well in school, follows routines, and needs stability to function. That was very clear from the start. We talked about it at length before blending the household. Once they moved in, I realized quickly that my son's grief was clashing with everything we were trying to build. He was loud when he cried. He would shut down entire evenings. He resisted family routines. He refused to participate in planned activities. My stepdaughter would retreat to her room and have anxiety spikes whenever things got emotionally heavy. So we put rules in place, nothing extreme. Clear schedules, emotional regulation guidelines, no late-night breakdowns that kept the house awake. We used a whiteboard for chores and expectations. It helped everyone except him. The breaking point happened at my stepdaughter's birthday dinner. We were out at a restaurant, something small and planned weeks in advance. Halfway through, my son started crying at the table, loudly. People were staring. My stepdaughter froze up completely. She didn't even eat her cake. Later, my wife said what I had been thinking, but didn't want to admit. That moments like that turn every milestone into something heavy and uncomfortable. That my son's grief was dominating spaces where it didn't belong anymore. I grounded him for the outburst, not because he was sad, but because of the timing and the lack of control. That distinction seems to matter to no one except me. After that, things spiraled. He cried more. He withdrew more. Teachers started emailing about emotional disruptions. My stepdaughter started having panic episodes before family events. I felt like I was managing one child's emotions at the expense of another's mental health. So I made a decision. I enrolled my son in a boarding school, not an elite one, a structured one, very rules-based, focused on discipline, routine, and accountability. It was marketed as character building. I thought the distance and structure would help him reset. I didn't ask him first. I informed him after everything was finalized. At that point, the decision was already made. When I dropped him off, he asked if he had done something wrong. I told him that he hadn't adapted to the changes in the household and that sometimes people need a different environment to grow. I thought being honest was better than sugarcoating it. Since then, everything has been a nightmare. He refuses to come home for Christmas. He stopped answering my calls. He blocked my wife completely. He sent a message saying I no longer exist to him. My parents won't stop calling. They say I abandoned him. They say I chose my new family over him. They keep throwing his mother's death in my face like it's a permanent excuse for everything. I don't see it that way. At what point does grief stop being something we accommodate endlessly? At what point does protecting one child's emotional comfort become more important than another's constant disruption? I didn't send him away to punish him. I sent him away because the household could not function around him anymore. I don't think I did anything unforgivable, but apparently my son does. Update 1. So I wanted to come back because a lot of comments are acting like I just sent my son away for being sad or that I'm some kind of monster. I think people are missing a lot of context, and honestly, some of the things that happened leading up to boarding school are being left out completely, so I want to lay it all out. This isn't to justify everything, but I need people to understand why I did what I did. First, the household rules. After my wife and her daughter moved in, I had to completely reorganize how the house ran. I made a whiteboard with daily schedules, chore charts, meal routines, and what I called emotional regulation hours. It was meant to give structure to everyone because we were juggling grief, anxiety, and 2 very different kids. My son was told he could journal about his grief, but only at assigned times. No crying during meals, no bringing up sad stuff at stepdaughter's birthday parties, and no monopolizing conversations with negative thoughts outside the allotted times. It sounds strict, but the other kid thrived under it. My son couldn't adjust. A few things that have barely been mentioned. Any photos of his mother in shared spaces were removed, not to erase her memory, but because seeing them set him off in ways that disrupted everything else. One night, he left her scarf on the couch. My wife threw it away, and I sided with her. I called it a clutter attachment, which I meant literally. He lost it and started screaming, but this is exactly the kind of meltdown we were trying to prevent in the first place. He refused dinner that night. He started sneaking calls to my parents at night. I found out because his phone would buzz in the living room. I confiscated it permanently. That only made things worse. He stopped eating at home. I know it seems harsh, but if you're setting rules, you can't just let them break them repeatedly without consequences. That's not discipline, that's chaos. And that chaos had been consuming our household for months. Stepdaughter wouldn't eat either if she saw him crying or yelling. The entire dynamic was toxic for her. After the birthday dinner meltdown, I realized I had to take more serious steps. Boarding school wasn't about punishment, it was about putting him in an environment that had boundaries he couldn't respect at home. The school is highly structured, very routine-focused. They have therapy, but it's discipline-oriented. I even emailed the counselors explicitly telling them that his grief was attention-seeking and that interventions should be geared toward building structure, not letting him wallow. I thought that was fair. I wanted him to learn self-control, but some people online are acting like I'm heartless. A lot of commenters also seem to think I didn't care about him at all. I did. I still call and check in. I've tried to explain that the house cannot run around his every emotion. My stepdaughter needs stability. She doesn't sleep well if he has a breakdown. She has anxiety, and even small triggers affect her ability to function. I can't just let one child's grief destroy the other child's life every day. And yes, there were arguments. Yes, he cried. Yes, he called me terrible things. But this isn't about ignoring him. It's about recognizing that grief can become disruptive if there's no limits. And limits were exactly what he refused. There were warnings, meetings, charts, rules, and he still couldn't follow them. This was not a snap decision. This was a progression over months of him refusing to adapt. Since he's been at boarding school, he stopped answering calls, refuses to come home, and sent a message saying I no longer exist to him. Grandparents are calling nonstop, telling me I'm abusive. Everyone is siding with him without knowing the full story. I feel like the context of months of daily disruption, strict rules, and attempts at teaching boundaries is completely missing. I can't just roll over and let him wreck the house for everyone else. I'm not saying I handled every moment perfectly. I know I probably made mistakes, but the way this is being portrayed online makes it sound like I just abandoned him for being sad. That's not the case. I gave him structure, rules, and an environment where he could learn to manage himself. That environment just isn't home. And I guess that's what really makes people hate me, that I made him leave. Update 2. Okay, so I need to come back because this has gotten way bigger than I expected, and I honestly feel like people still aren't seeing the full picture. A lot of you are acting like I just sent my son away and crossed my fingers while the world collapsed. That's not remotely true, and the fallout over the last month has been insane. First, the boarding school. I was trying to keep him in a structured environment, right? I thought the discipline-focused setup would give him boundaries, a daily routine, and some space to figure himself out. That's what these places do. They're not cruel, they're structured. But apparently my son didn't see it that way. The school started sending reports that he was self-isolating in his room, refusing to talk to counselors, and withdrawing completely from activities. One essay he wrote came back to me flagged as disturbing. He compared his grief to being erased slowly, said he felt like a ghost. It wasn't just sad, they interpreted it as emotional neglect. I got a call from the school counselor about possible abuse at home. I lost it. I called them and basically told them they were weaponizing therapy language and exaggerating. My son's grief wasn't abuse. It was attention-seeking and disruptive, exactly what I had told them in my emails. He had been warned, we had rules, and this was the consequence of not following them. I expected pushback, sure, but the counselor going straight to child welfare was too much. Then CPS got involved. Yes, CPS. I had to deal with social workers going through the house, asking questions, demanding records, and talking to stepdaughter and wife about everything. I explained the house rules, the emotional schedules, the journaling hours, all of it. CPS wasn't impressed. They were framing the structure and the boundaries as rigid and punitive. I kept saying, this is about maintaining a functioning household, not breaking him. I even showed them the charts where violations were logged. Stepdaughter was calm, well-adjusted, thriving. She could eat, sleep, and learn because my son's breakdowns weren't dictating the house. But somehow, that didn't matter. Here's the real kicker. I learned something from the school that I hadn't fully understood. Stepdaughter had actually been pushing him to act sad in private, mocking him, saying things like, "You're lucky your mom died first," and that she didn't need to compete with a ghost. I knew about one incident, punished him for overreacting, but had no idea she'd been actively provoking him behind the scenes. Even worse, stepdaughter admitted later that she had mentioned to my wife that she was uncomfortable seeing him look sad around the house. My wife apparently encouraged the boarding school placement partly because she didn't want him making her daughter feel replaced. So suddenly, what I thought was my careful, structured decision now looked like I was throwing a grieving kid away for someone else's comfort. And yes, in a sense that's the entire point, honestly. I prioritized stepdaughter's stability because her anxiety is well documented and she actually responds to rules. My son didn't. But now everyone online is calling me cruel, my parents are texting nonstop about abuse, and the school reports are going around like they prove I'm a bad parent. And it gets worse socially. I got an anonymous complaint to HR at work. They asked me to step back from a leadership project. Friends with kids stopped inviting me anywhere. Even people I thought understood family dynamics are treating me like I'm a villain. I keep telling myself I did what had to be done. I tried for months to get him to follow rules, tried to manage his grief without it consuming the household, and now the backlash is out of control. People keep saying I abandoned him. I didn't. I checked in every week, made calls, tried to explain the reasoning, but it's clear now he sees me as the enemy. He stopped answering most of my messages. He doesn't want to come home. And the essays, the flags, the CPS reports, all of it has snowballed. I'm not proud that stepdaughter's manipulation played a role. I didn't know the full extent of it at the time, but I don't regret that I acted to protect the household and keep him from hijacking everything. I just didn't expect the cascade of consequences. I thought structure would be respected. I thought limits could teach resilience. Instead, it's a PR nightmare, a social disaster, and he's now completely convinced I'm the villain in his story. So yes, it's worse than I thought. CPS, school counselors, stepdaughter's private provocations, grandparents calling like crazy, and my social life tanking. And still, I'm sitting here wondering, should grief be allowed to dominate a household indefinitely? Or was I right to make the tough choice, even if it blows up in every possible direction? I'm honestly at the point where I feel like I'm being persecuted for trying to do my job as a parent, and yes, I admit it. Maybe I went too far in how I enforced boundaries, but let me be clear, this was never about ignoring grief. It was about preventing it from taking over the lives of everyone else in the house. Update 3. I honestly don't even know where to start anymore because it's gotten completely out of control, and I feel like every day I try to fix this, it just spirals further. After the CPS stuff, the school reports, and the endless calls from grandparents, I figured I needed to take a firmer hand. I thought if I just reminded him who was in charge, the situation might calm down. I was wrong. I drove to the boarding school last week without warning. I wanted to see him, talk to him, explain my side, make him understand that this was never personal. It was about boundaries, structure, and keeping the household functional. I showed up at the main office, and honestly, I was prepared for some resistance, but not for the outright hostility. They told me I couldn't just barge in, that I needed an appointment, and that any visitation had to be supervised. I insisted. I demanded to see him. I told them he needed to hear me, that this was my son, that this was about parenting. And yeah, I admit, I may have raised my voice a little, but I was calm, reasonable. I thought they'd understand. They didn't. The school security walked me to the door, firmly but politely, and escorted me out. I left fuming. I was not going to sit quietly while my son was being protected from me, while my steps were questioned, and while people painted me as some monster. Then came the legal escalation. He requested a no-contact order. My son, 14, legally trying to block me from him. The grandparents petitioned for guardianship. The whole house of cards I had carefully built, the whiteboards, the schedules, the emotional boundaries suddenly felt like it had been ripped from under me. I thought I was preparing him to thrive, but everyone was framing me as a threat. I'm not going to lie, I retaliated. I froze his savings account. Everything I had set aside for him, gone. I sold some of his childhood belongings, the toys, the bikes, the little trophies he used to get excited about. I threw away the remaining photos of his mother. My wife tried to stop me. She said it was too far, that he needed to remember his mother, but I kept thinking, if he's going to use her memory as an excuse to manipulate everyone against me, then I don't owe him sentimental clutter. He's acting like a ghost anyway. This, unsurprisingly, put an enormous strain on my marriage. My wife started avoiding me, making excuses about being afraid I was cold and too rigid. Stepdaughter, who I had tried so hard to protect, started distancing herself too. She still follows the rules, still performs well at school, but the warmth in the house is gone. She used to greet me in the morning, hug me before school. Now it's just a nod, a barely audible good morning. I keep reminding myself I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I was trying to build a future, not live in a shrine of grief and chaos. But even I have to admit, it feels hollow. I still maintain, though, that everything I did was in service of order and structure. I was trying to keep the household from completely imploding under his grief. He had been crying at the dinner table, disrupting birthdays, refusing meals, calling grandparents behind my back, and honestly, acting like his mother's death was some kind of license to derail everyone else's life. I gave him structure, guidance, and a chance to adapt. He didn't. And now he's actively turning against me. The essays, the counselors, the grandparents, CPS, the lawyers, all of it is proof in his mind that I'm a villain. He won't answer my calls. He won't text back. He won't even acknowledge my existence when I try to leave messages. I sit in this house, which I meticulously organized, and I realize it doesn't feel like a home anymore. It's just a set of walls I control, but I don't control anything inside them. People online keep saying I abandoned him, that I destroyed my family. I don't see it that way. I made hard choices, the kind of choices that no one wants to make, because they're uncomfortable and unpopular. I tried to prevent his grief from dominating every aspect of life for everyone else. I was efficient, I was reasonable, but now the cost is painfully clear. I still haven't given up. I still believe in the structure I created. I still think grief should be contained, not allowed to hijack a household. But I also know that every measure I've taken, every attempt to enforce rules, has backfired in a way I couldn't anticipate. He's been turned against me by forces I can't fully control: counselors, grandparents, his own misinterpretation of my intentions. And the worst part? I can see the truth, but nobody else seems to care. I don't know how to get him back. I don't know if he even wants to come home anymore. And yet, every part of me wants to fight, to reclaim control, to prove that I wasn't wrong. Because in my head, I wasn't. Final update. The court ruling came down last week. I lost. Guardianship, full and final, awarded to my son's grandparents. Not partially, not shared fully. The judge made it clear that my actions, my discipline-focused interventions, were seen as emotionally neglectful. All the careful scheduling, the whiteboards, the charts marking every violation, none of it mattered. My son, the kid I had tried so hard to mold into resilience, is legally out of my life. The finality hit hard when I got the papers. He's moving in with the grandparents immediately. They've started changing his school enrollment, updating his legal documents, and then came the one I wasn't ready for: the name change. My son, 14 years old, has decided to take his mother's maiden name, a symbolic erasure, I suppose, of everything I had tried to force on him, everything I tried to control. Every argument I ever had about structure, efficiency, emotional containment erased in one motion. I keep replaying the moments I thought I was doing the right thing, sending him to boarding school, removing photos of his mother, limiting grief journaling, confiscating his phone, freezing his savings account, selling his belongings. I thought I was preventing chaos. I thought I was protecting the household, protecting my stepdaughter. I didn't realize that every measure I took was stacking against me, turning my son into someone who sees me as the enemy. The irony of it all is brutal. He's thriving. I found out he was accepted into a creative writing program, competitive, impressive, exactly the kind of thing I would have scheduled him for, guided him toward, polished him into. But he got there on his own, through his own grief, his own mind, his own experience, without me. And the kicker? One of his essays, the one comparing grief to being erased, went semi-viral locally. People are reading it online, identifying pieces of our story. It's me. They can't say my name, but anyone who knew us would recognize it. The person who thought he was disruptive is now the villain in his narrative. I tried to reach out once, a letter, carefully written, calm, rationalizing everything, trying to explain that I had only ever wanted him to adapt, to grow, to learn boundaries, to function in the world. I explained that it was never personal, that I never stopped loving him. His reply was brief, cold, final. And the stepdaughter? She's distant, quiet, polite, but cold. My marriage is fractured, full of tension and accusations I can't even explain away anymore. My social circle has narrowed. The friends who once envied my household, my control, my structure, now tiptoe around me, some quietly, some not so quietly. I'm a cautionary tale, and I can feel it. I suppose I should have expected some of this. But the speed, the completeness, the inevitability of it all that hit harder than anything else. I was obsessed with control, obsessed with structure, obsessed with efficiency. I thought I could manage grief. I thought I could discipline life itself. But grief is not something you schedule. It's not something you chart. It's not something you erase. And now, the final truth is staring me in the face. My son doesn't exist for me anymore. Not in the way a parent-child relationship should exist. He has a name, a home, a life without me. And I can't reach him, can't influence him, can't shape him. All the carefully constructed walls, rules, and plans meaningless.